picture this, if you will. It is a very, very particular kind of evening.
Oh, I bet I know exactly the kind you're talking about.
Right. You know the exact one. It's overcast. The day is just, unhurried, maybe winding down after a really long stretch of hours.
Yeah.
And you're just looking out a window. And the city outside, or I guess just the street outside your house, is this beautiful, blurred wash of amber light from the street lamps.
That is a very specific, very cinematic mood.
It is. And it's quiet. And in that specific quiet moment, what do? You reach for your phone, or maybe you go to your record player if you're into that, and you put on the absolute saddest song you know.
Oh, totally. The one guaranteed to wreck you.
Exactly. You actively seek out a piece of music that is engineered to break your heart. But here's the kicker, right? You do not do this because some fresh tragedy has just struck your life.
Right. You haven't just been fired.
No, you haven't just been through a horrible breakup or anything. You play that devastating song simply because something inside of you in that quiet amber light just needs to be named.
It needs a shape.
Yes. And we assume, biologically speaking, that human beings are wired to avoid pain at all costs. I mean, you touch a hot stove, your nervous system forces you to pull your hand back.
Pure survival mechanism.
Exactly, it's survival. So why on earth do we voluntarily press play on a track that we know is going to completely shatter us?
It makes no logical sense on the surface.
None at all. So today, we are doing a deep dive into what is known as the sad music paradox. We are looking at a stack of research and a really incredible central essay we've gathered on the aesthetics of melancholy.
And our mission here is really to investigate why consuming music, literature, and art that makes us ache isn't, a pathology,
Right.
but it's actually this profoundly necessary psychological tool.
Yeah.
We're going to explore exactly how sad art provides this incredible psychological relief.
It's so fascinating because it really is one of the most counterintuitive behaviors we engage in.
It really is. And yet it is entirely universal. Just to validate you, the listener, as we sort of set the tone for this exploration, this is not some modern phenomena.
It's not just angsty teens on the internet.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't born out of internet-era angst or like the invention of noise-canceling headphones. If we look at the historical data, humans have actively and purposefully chosen art that makes them ache for literally millennia.
Millennia.
We are talking about a behavior that spans across vastly different cultures and eras. I mean, the Greeks literally engineered massive, acoustically perfect amphitheaters, specifically for the communal performance of tragedy.
Wait, like specifically for tragedy?
Yes. They didn't build them just for, comedy or victory speeches. They built them to sit there and watch people's lives fall apart.
That is wild.
And in Japan, entire aesthetic philosophies were cultivated around the tender sadness of things ending. The romantic painters of Europe, they obsessed over shipwrecks and violent storms.
Crumbling ruins, all that stuff.
Exactly. And if you jump to the present day and look at the metrics on major streaming platforms, the most played, most saved playlists are overwhelmingly populated by songs about heartbreak.
Heartbreak, loss, just this unnameable longing.
Yeah. So this isn't a glitch in our operating system. It's a feature.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the biological paradox itself, because I want to push back just a little bit on the idea that this is entirely natural.
Sure.
Because in the real world, pain requires a physiological response. If I encounter something that causes me emotional, say, a huge confrontation with a coworker.
Right, or a sudden financial crisis.
Exactly. My body just dumps cortisol into my bloodstream, my heart rate spikes, my instinct is flight or fight,
Right.
Avoidance.
The body treats emotional pain very much like physical pain.
So how does the brain differentiate between the real-world pain it desperately wants to escape and the pain in a sad song that it actively seeks out?
That is the exact friction at the center of the research. To understand the difference, we have to look at the cognitive mechanisms of how we process art versus how we process reality.
Okay.
The text we're analyzing gives us a very clear, potent answer. It says that a sad song doesn't actually deliver pain. It delivers recognition.
Recognition, meaning like the song isn't infecting you with a sadness you didn't already have.
Exactly. It's not a foreign virus. The sorrow isn't manufactured out of thin air by the melody.
Right.
When you hear a singer's voice crack on exactly the right agonizing note, or when a chord progression builds up and then resolves into a minor key that feels utterly unresolved.
Oh, I love those chords.
Right. Something deep inside your neurological architecture responds. The brain recognizes a pattern. It essentially says, yes, That is the exact frequency of the feeling I have been carrying around all day.
Or maybe all year. But I just couldn't find the vocabulary for it.
Precisely.
So it's sort of like walking around with a phantom weight on your shoulders. You know you're tired, you know you're weighed down, but you can't actually see the weight.
That's a great way to put it.
And then the song comes along and suddenly holds up a mirror. And you can finally see the burden you've been carrying. But seeing it doesn't make it heavier, right? It actually makes it manageable because now it has a shape.
And that brings us to the neurobiology of why that recognition actually feels good and how sad art gives us psychological relief.
Tell me about the biology of it.
So in a real-world crisis,
Yeah.
your grief or anxiety demands action. It demands problem solving. And that cognitive load is exhausting.
Oh, completely.
But when you listen to a sad song, the brain knows, on a really fundamental level, that there is no real-world threat. Your prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of your brain, signals to your amygdala that you're safe.
The amygdala being the threat detection center, right?
Exactly. The prefrontal cortex is basically saying, hey, calm down. We're just sitting in our room. There's no bear chasing us.
We're just listening to Adele.
Right. And because there is no demand for action, the body is free to process the emotion purely as an aesthetic experience.
There is a piece of data in our source material that just blew my mind regarding this exact physiological response. The text notes the statistic that 72% of people report feeling comforted by sad music.
72%.
Almost 3/4 of humanity. And they aren't saying it makes them depressed. They are explicitly using the word comforted. How is the body translating a sad melody into physical comfort?
It's funny you mentioned that specific 72% statistic because there's a prominent music psychologist, Tuomo, who has done extensive laboratory research on this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Irola and his team actually monitored subjects listening to melancholic music and found that they don't enjoy it despite the sadness. They enjoy it because of it.
Because of the sadness.
Yes. The researchers identified a very specific emotional state triggered by this music, which they call felt tenderness.
Felt tenderness. That sounds incredibly gentle, but sadness usually feels really sharp to me. It feels jagged.
Right.
How does a jagged emotion become tender just because there's a piano playing in the background?
It has to do with the hormones your body releases when it engages with art. When you experience real loss, your body releases hormones to help you cope with the trauma, one of which is prolactin.
Prolactin.
Prolactin is a consoling hormone. It produces a feeling of calmness and consolation to counteract the extreme stress of grief.
Wow.
So when you listen to a sad song, your brain empathizes with the sadness in the music. And this empathy tricks the body into releasing prolactin.
Wait, so it releases the consoling hormone even though nothing bad actually happened?
Exactly. Because there is no actual traumatic event happening to you in that moment because your prefrontal cortex knows you are safe.
Mm-hmm.
You get the consoling, warming effect of the prolactin without the devastating real-world grief.
You get the biochemical comfort without the real-world cost.
That is felt tenderness.
That is absolutely wild. We are literally biohacking our own comfort systems using art. We are triggering consoling hormones on demand.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It really is. And, to tie that biological mechanism back to the philosophical side, there is this incredible quote from the essay that perfectly captures what that feels like.
Oh, I think I know the one.
The author writes, melancholy is not the absence of joy. It is the presence of something too tender to carry alone, and art is the arms that hold it.
It is a stunning reframing of what melancholy actually is. Because in modern, highly optimized, productivity-obsessed cultures, we tend to medicalize sadness.
We view melancholy as a deficit.
Right. We assume that joy is the baseline human state. And if you are melancholic, it means your joy has been drained away. You are viewed as empty or broken or in need of a fix.
Right. The idea is that you have a flat tire and you need to get it patched so you can get back on the road of relentless positivity.
Yes, exactly.
But this quote flips that entirely. It says, melancholy is not an emptiness at all. It is a profound fullness. It is a presence. You're holding an emotion so delicate, so fragile, and so heavy that your own two psychological arms just aren't enough to carry it.
And that is where the concept of the frame becomes so crucial.
The frame, let's dig into that.
Think about the sadness you feel in your everyday life. Maybe it's generalized anxiety about the future or grief over a passing phase of your life, or just the low-level background hum of human loneliness.
Sure.
That real-world sadness is chaotic. It lacks boundaries. It bleeds into your workday, into your sleep, into your relationships. It feels infinite.
Which is what makes it so terrifying.
Yes. Yeah. But when you listen to a sad song, that chaotic, unframed, real-world sadness is suddenly placed inside a structure.
Because a song has absolute mathematical rules. It has a tempo, it has a beginning, a middle, and a definitive end.
Exactly. The emotion is real, but it is now being held within the structural frame of a 3-minute, 30-second track.
Right.
The sorrow is contained by the lyrics, the melody, the production. And because it's framed, because it is given strict boundaries, it suddenly transforms from something threatening into something bearable.
And beyond just bearable, because it has a melody and a rhythm, it actually becomes beautiful.
Right. The art provides the arms to hold the tenderness. It offers immense psychological relief because you are no longer managing the weight of it entirely on your own in the void.
You're sharing it with the artist within a defined space.
Exactly.
I hear that, but let me push back a bit, or at least try to contextualize it.
Go for it.
If I'm listening to a devastating album in a dark room for 3 hours, where is the boundary? Is consuming sad art sort of like a controlled burn in a forest?
Oh, that's an interesting analogy.
Like if you just let dry brush accumulate in a forest, eventually a random lightning strike will cause a massive catastrophic wildfire that destroys everything.
Right.
So to prevent that, forest rangers will intentionally set small, controlled fires to burn away that excess brush safely. Fire is technically destructive, just like sadness is technically painful.
Yeah.
But because the ranger's fire is contained, and most importantly, intentional, just like putting on a sad song is intentional, it actually prevents a massive, overwhelming emotional wildfire down the line. It's preventative.
That is a phenomenal analogy. It perfectly illustrates the psychological mechanism at play here. The controlled burn gives the fire a boundary. Sad art gives our grief a boundary.
Right.
When you purposefully put on a melancholic album, you are acting as the forest ranger of your own psyche. You are intentionally engaging with the difficult emotion in a safe, controlled environment.
Because you know the album will eventually end.
Exactly. Therefore, you can fully surrender to the sorrow without the terror that it will consume your entire life.
Well, what happens when the wind changes? To stick with the analogy, if a forest ranger sets a controlled burn and the wind suddenly shifts, that small fire can jump the line and become a real wildfire.
Yeah, it can.
Can sad art do that? Can you listen to a sad song and suddenly find yourself spiraling into actual unmanageable despair instead of finding that psychological relief?
That is a very astute question, and it really speaks to the difference between clinical depression and aesthetic melancholy.
Okay.
Yes, if a person is in a state of acute clinical depression or processing fresh, raw trauma, the wind is essentially already changed. The cognitive buffers we talked about earlier, the prefrontal cortex signaling safety, might be compromised.
So the prolactin trick doesn't work.
Right. In those cases, a sad song might not provide the consoling prolactin response. It might just amplify the existing distress.
That makes sense.
But for the general experience of melancholy, for the day-to-day processing of the human condition, the intentionality of choosing the art is usually what keeps the fire contained. The act of pressing play is an assertion of agency,
You are choosing to enter the emotion.
which means you fundamentally retain the power to leave it.
That distinction of agency is so clarifying. It is the control that makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
Now, if a 3 or 4 minute song can provide that kind of momentary frame for our emotions, acting as a small controlled burn, what happens when we need a much larger container? What happens when we are dealing not just with a passing mood, but with the massive permanent losses that define a human life? Because our source material pivots here from the sad music paradox to what it calls broken stories.
Yes, we are moving from short-form music to long-form narratives, books, plays, films that take hours or even days to consume.
This is where we must return to the Greeks
Right.
and deeply examine their invention of tragedy.
I must. The text emphasizes that Western theater has over 2,400 years of recorded tragedy.
2,400 years.
Think about the logistical effort involved in that back then. The Greeks quarried stone, built massive amphitheaters into the sides of hills that could hold 10,000 people, and gathered the entire citizenry together.
And for what? To watch Oedipus realize he has destroyed his own family.
To watch Antigone choose death over compromising her morals. We have been sitting in the dark, watching people's lives completely unravel on stage for millennia.
The Greeks used the term catharsis for this, which we often casually throw around today to mean, like, having a really good cry.
Oh, that was so cathartic.
Yeah, but it was a much more structured concept for them, wasn't it? Isn't catharsis essentially just emotional vomiting? Like you build up too much feeling, you go to the theater, you purge it, and you go home empty.
It is often misunderstood as a simple purge, yes. But in Aristotle's Poetics, Catharsis isn't just about emptying yourself out. It is about clarification and purification.
Clarification.
It is an intellectual and emotional recalibration. The tragedy forces the audience to experience pity and fear. Pity for the protagonist whose life is falling apart, and fear because the audience recognizes that they too are subject to the same chaotic whims of fate.
Wow.
By experiencing these intense emotions in the highly structured communal setting of the theater, the audience achieves a state of emotional balance. They don't leave empty, they leave calibrated.
And the mechanism for that calibration in Greek tragedy was often what they called hamartia, right? The tragic flaw.
Yes.
But I've always thought flaw was a bad translation. It makes it sound like the hero just had a bad habit they could have fixed if they went to therapy.
Like they just didn't journal enough.
Exactly. But hamartia is more like an inevitable error in judgment, a blind spot that is inextricably linked to their greatest strength.
Exactly. And that concept maps perfectly onto what our source essay calls broken stories in the modern era. The essay lists some very specific examples of these fractured long-form narratives.
Like what?
It mentions Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, Michael Cunningham's The Hours, James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, and Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go.
Oh, wow.
These are not light beach reads. They are profoundly devastating pieces of literature.
Devastating is the word. I mean, if you've read Never Let Me Go, you literally walk around in a daze for a week
It
afterwards.
stays with you.
But the author of our source text breaks down the core anatomy of what makes a story broken in a way that goes beyond just saying, oh, it has a sad ending. These are not stories where the hero slays the dragon, learns a valuable lesson, and restores order to the kingdom. They are stories, according to the text, about people who don't get what they want, who lose things they can't replace, who are undone by the gap between who they are and who the world needs them to be.
I want to focus on that last phrase. Undone by the gap between who they are and who the world needs them to be.
So tragic.
This is the modern iteration of hamartia. In Giovanni's Room, David is utterly undone by his inability to reconcile his true desires with the rigid expectations of mid-century American masculinity.
The gap between his internal reality and societal demands is exactly what destroys him and the people he loves.
Exactly. And in Anna Karenina, Anna is destroyed by the brutal hypocrisy of Russian high society, which demands she play the role of the dutiful wife while turning a blind eye to the indiscretions of men.
The gap is fatal.
It is.
And that gap is just a spectacular, terrifying way to describe the human condition. Because while we might not be facing the extreme, tragic consequences that Anna Karenina faces, I feel like almost everyone at some point in their week feels the friction of that exact gap.
Oh, absolutely.
You know who you are internally, but your job, your family, your economic reality, your society demands a different version of you, so you put on the mask. And that daily friction causes a deep, often unexpressed sorrow.
It does. And in real life, experiencing that friction directly, or experiencing the loss of something truly irreplaceable like the death of a parent or the end of a marriage, is incredibly blinding.
Blinding, right.
Up close, our own real-life grief is entirely overwhelming. It is chaotic, just like the unframed sadness we discussed earlier. When you are in the center of your own trauma, the amygdala is firing constantly.
It's pure panic.
Your brain perceives the grief as a literal threat to your survival. It is too bright and too hot to look at directly. You cannot analyze your own heartbreak while you are actively being broken.
Which raises an incredibly important question. If our own grief is too blinding to look at, how do we ever process it? If we can't look directly at the sun, how do we study it?
That is the big question.
And the answer, according to the research, is what literary theorists and psychologists call narrative distance.
Yes. Narrative distance is the psychological buffer that fiction provides. We do not read Anna Karenina or The Hours simply to wallow in the misery of fictional characters.
Right, it's not misery tourism.
No. The essay argues that we read these broken stories to map. We are using the distance of fiction to explore complex, terrifying feelings safely.
Explain how that mapping works on a neurological level. Because if I'm reading about someone dying, shouldn't my brain react with that same threat response?
This is where mirror neurons come into play. When you read a highly evocative passage about a character experiencing profound loss, your mirror neurons fire as if you are experiencing the emotion yourself.
You feel the knot in your stomach.
You feel the prick of tears. However, because the pronoun on the page is she or he instead of I, because it is happening to Anna or to David or to the clones in Never Let Me Go, And not to you, your ego's defense mechanisms remain lowered.
Ah. Because if the pronoun was I, the ego would throw up walls to protect me from the pain. It would induce denial or anger or dissociation.
Exactly. The third-person perspective bypasses the brain's threat response. The fictional character's grief becomes a Trojan horse.
That's a great metaphor.
It sneaks past your defenses and becomes a safe container for your own real grief. Take Never Let Me Go, for instance. Without giving away the entire plot, it is a story about individuals who know their lifespans are artificially shortened.
It's so brutal.
And they have absolutely no power to change their fate. They just have to accept it and try to find moments of connection in the time they have.
It's an incredibly potent metaphor, because when we read that and we find ourselves weeping over the utter unfairness of their fate, we aren't just crying for the characters, are we?
No, we aren't.
We are, on a deep, subconscious level, safely projecting our own anxieties about our own mortality. We are mourning the fact that our own time is limited, that the universe is inherently unfair, and that we cannot protect the people we love from aging and dying.
You are secretly crying for yourself. But because you are crying for a fictional character in a sci-fi adjacent literary novel, you don't feel the paralyzing existential terror you would feel if you were staring in the mirror at 3 a.m. contemplating your own death.
Right.
You achieve profound psychological relief because you've found a back door into your own heart. You have mapped the territory of grief without having to walk barefoot through the thorns.
Wow. We cry for them, and in doing so, we cry for ourselves. That completely shifts the paradigm of how we should view so-called depressing books or movies.
It really does.
Because I hear people say all the time, and honestly, I have said it myself, oh, I don't want to watch that movie. It's too depressing. I have enough stress in my real life. I just want to watch a comedy.
Right, the desire for escapism.
And there is absolutely a time and place for comedy and escapism. But what this deep dive is showing us is that these broken stories aren't dragging us down into the mud. They're actually throwing us a rope.
Yes.
They are showing us that the gap we feel, the friction we endure, the losses we sustain are universal. They show us we aren't alone in the dark.
They validate the human experience in a way that bright, relentless positivity cannot. Think about the psychological impact of only consuming flawlessly happy media.
Oh, it's terrible.
If your internal reality is struggling, if you feel lost or grieving or inadequate, and you look at a screen filled with triumphant heroes who easily overcome their obstacles, or romantic comedies where every misunderstanding is neatly resolved in 90 minutes, the cognitive dissonance can be agonizing.
It can actually increase your feelings of isolation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You look at the happy characters and think, what is wrong with me? Why is my life so messy and painful when everyone else seems to figure it out? It weaponizes your own struggle against you.
It really pathologizes normal human suffering. But when you engage with a broken story, the narrative looks at your grief and says, yes, this is how it is. This is the cost of being alive.
It affirms your reality.
Right.
Which is an incredibly powerful tool for psychological survival.
It really is. And what is incredible to me is that this profound understanding of sadness isn't just a Western psychological concept cooked up in a lab in the 21st century.
No, not at all.
Nor is it strictly tied to the Greek theatrical tradition. The essay takes this brilliant turn and zooms out to look at how different cultures have built entire aesthetic, philosophical, and almost spiritual frameworks around this beautiful sadness.
This is one of my favorite parts of the essay.
Mine too. It gives us two very specific, culturally unique concepts that I really want to spend some time analyzing, because comparing the concepts of melancholy in Japanese and Portuguese cultures is just deeply revealing. Let's start with the Japanese concept, which is called mono no aware.
Mono no aware is a foundational pillar of Japanese aesthetics and philosophy. The phrase was coined in the 18th century by the scholar Moturi Norinaga, but the feeling it describes has been deeply embedded in Japanese culture, literature, and Shinto and Buddhist thought for much longer.
How does it translate literally?
Literally translated, mono means things, and aware translates roughly to pathos, sorrow, or a deep emotional resonance. So it is often translated as the pathos of things.
The pathos of things.
But as the essay beautifully expands upon, it is much more complex than just feeling sad about objects. It is an acute awareness of impermanence that is tinged, crucially, not with despair, but with a gentle, sighing appreciation.
The text uses the classic, perhaps the most famous example to illustrate the cherry blossoms, or sakura.
Right, the perfect example.
These blossoms are deeply revered in Japanese culture. Every spring, millions of people track the cherry blossom front as it sweeps across the country, and they gather in parks for hanami, which are flower viewing parties.
It's a huge cultural event.
But the core tenet of Mono No Aware is that the cherry blossoms are not beautiful, despite the fact that they will fall in a week. They are beautiful because they fall.
That is the essential pivot in perspective. If the cherry blossoms were made of some indestructible biological plastic, if they bloomed continuously all year round and never faded, they wouldn't be revered.
They would just be background scenery.
Exactly. We would walk past them without a second thought. Their aesthetic and emotional value is inextricably linked to their death.
So it's fundamentally anti-preservation. It inherently rejects the Western instinct to freeze a moment in time, to try and capture youth forever, or to view aging and endings as a failure.
Precisely. It is an aesthetic philosophy that requires an acceptance of mortality. Consider a sunset.
Okay.
A sunset moves us to a state of awe precisely because it is a vanishing act. It lasts only a few minutes, painting the sky with these impossible colors before the dark inevitably takes over.
If the sky looked like a sunset 24 hours a day, it would lose all its emotional power.
Mono No Aware suggests that sadness and beauty are not opposites, nor are they enemies. They are vital partners. To truly appreciate the beauty of the world is to simultaneously actively accept that you will inevitably lose it.
It's the quiet, melancholic sigh that accompanies the recognition of life's transient nature. It is an aesthetic choice to see the fading of things as a feature, not a bug.
That's a great way to summarize it.
The impermanence is the engine of the beauty. That is so deeply profound. And then our source material contrasts this with a concept from the other side of the world, from Portugal's saudade.
Saudade.
Now, this is a word that famously lacks a direct English translation, which always makes a word infinitely more interesting to me. The text defines saudade as a deep, melancholic longing for something loved and lost, a person, a place, a time, or even something never truly possessed.
Saudade is a profound, heavy concept. It is the defining emotional undercurrent of Portuguese culture, famously expressed in fado music.
Fado music, yes.
Which, if you haven't heard it, is a breathtakingly mournful, haunting genre of singing, often accompanied by classical guitar. While Mono No Aware finds beauty in the act of fading, saudade focuses on the beauty of the absence itself.
The absence.
The essay points out that it describes not just the gaping hole left behind by loss, but the strange, enduring majesty of that hole.
How does one find majesty in a hole, though? Usually when we have a void in our lives, say a friend moves away or someone we love deeply passes away, our instinct is to fill the void.
Right.
We try to move on, find new friends, distract ourselves. We view the absence as an injury that needs to heal over.
But saudade asks you not to heal over the void, but to construct a monument around it.
Wow.
To feel saudade means you loved someone or something so completely, so overwhelmingly, that the mere act of losing it and feeling the devastating weight of that loss forever becomes its own kind of gift.
The lingering pain is the proof of the love.
Yes. The absence becomes a tangible presence in your life. It is the enduring monument to a love that was real.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though, when we compare these two. When I look at these two concepts side by side, it seems to me like they are tackling this idea of sadness from completely opposite temporal directions.
What do you mean?
Think about it. Mono No Aware, the cherry blossoms falling, the sunset fading, it feels very rooted in the present moment. It is the acute sadness of watching the present actively slip away into the past right in front of your eyes. It is the grief of the now.
Right.
But saudade feels entirely rooted in looking backward. It is the profound longing for what is already gone, what is permanently stationed to the past. Are these two philosophies pulling the human psyche in different directions? Does one keep you trapped while the other lets you go?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of what the author is synthesizing here, your observation about the temporal directions is entirely accurate. They are facing different ways on the timeline of human experience.
Okay.
However, they actually lead to the exact same psychological destination.
Yeah.
Both Mono No Aware and saudade represent a radical refusal to fight the reality of loss.
They both involve surrender.
Yes. Whether you are mourning the present moment as it fades in front of you, or whether you are longing for a past that you know you can never return to, both cultures have reached a profound, mature conclusion.
That embracing loss, rather than denying it or running from it, is a form of deep emotional intelligence.
Exactly. Both concepts offer a cultural framework where melancholy is elevated to an art form and a way of life. They teach us that sorrow is not a failure of happiness. It is a testament to having cared about the world in the first place.
A testament to having care, because if you didn't care, you wouldn't feel the saudade for the person who left, and you wouldn't notice the cherry blossom falling to the ground. You would just be numb to the whole experience.
You'd miss it entirely.
Okay, so we have established that sadness can be beautiful, that it can be a vital tool for psychological relief and mapping, and that entire cultures revere it as a sign of emotional intelligence. But the essay then takes us a layer deeper, and arguably a layer darker. It pushes past the gentle, bittersweet sadness of a fading sunset and talks about actual, heavy darkness.
It does.
It asks how leaning into darker, more intense art connects to our personal integrity and our honesty. I really want to explore how sad art is connected to an individual's honesty.
This is a vital distinction in the text, moving from melancholy to the macabre and the Gothic. The author brings up the long-standing dark romantic aesthetic tradition.
Right?
We are talking about the romantic poets like John Keats, who famously wrote Ode on Melancholy. We are talking about writers like Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, the whole tradition of Gothic novelists, right up to contemporary artists, filmmakers, and musicians who work primarily with themes of shadow, madness, horror, and deep psychological distress.
Artists who don't just paint a sad portrait, but paint the absolute depths of despair.
Yeah.
And the immediate instinct for a lot of people, and again, society reinforces this heavily, is to look at someone reading Poe or listening to incredibly dark, dissonant music or obsessing over Gothic architecture and think, wow, that person is wallowing?
They think they're letting the darkness take over.
Right. They're feeding the wrong wolf. It is viewed as inherently unhealthy. But the essay introduces a core argument here that I think might be the most important sentence in the entire piece.
Which one?
It says, there is a vital difference between consuming darkness and being consumed by it.
Oh, that is the absolute crux of the aesthetic argument for dark art. The dark romantic tradition understands intuitively that engaging with dark art is not an act of surrender to despair. It is not giving up.
Right.
The essay explicitly states darkness, in this tradition, is not despair. It is depth.
Depth, meaning it gives you 3 dimensions instead of just a flat, brightly lit surface.
Exactly. Think of a painting. If a painting has no shadows, no contrast, it is flat. It lacks perspective. It doesn't look real.
It looks like a cartoon.
Right. In psychological terms, engaging with the darkness is the conscious acknowledgement that human life is not merely a series of pleasant events punctuated by minor inconveniences. The human psyche contains multitudes.
It really does.
The parts of us that suffer, the parts of us that harbor jealousy, profound grief, inexplicable anger, or paralyzing existential dread. These are not manufacturing defects that need to be surgically removed or medicated away so we can be more productive workers.
They are dimensions of the human experience that need to be explored and understood.
Exactly.
This makes me think about why sometimes when you are having a truly terrible, gut-wrenching day, being around aggressively bright, cheerful art can actually feel like a physical assault.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you ever been in a state of deep grief and someone puts on a super upbeat synthesized pop song or tries to make you watch a relentlessly positive saccharine movie?
It is the worst.
It doesn't lift you up. It actually makes you feel significantly worse. It feels profoundly alienating. It feels almost like the art is mocking your reality.
Because it feels false to your current reality. It induces a massive cognitive dissonance. Your internal world is in ruins, and the external world is aggressively demanding that you clap your hands and smile.
That dissonance is exhausting.
And that is what the essay touches upon beautifully when it discusses why we seek out the dark to find psychological relief. A painting that captures grief. Honestly, think of something visceral like Francis Bacon's Screaming Popes, or a poem that articulates despair perfectly, is not depressing to the person experiencing despair. It is true.
And truth, even when it is incredibly painful to look at, carries its own strange relief.
Precisely. When you encounter a piece of art that acknowledges the dark, brutal reality you are living in, your nervous system can finally stop pretending.
You don't have to force a smile.
You don't have to perform okayness for the benefit of others.
Yeah.
You are allowed to exist to the truth of your pain, validated by an artist who has clearly been exactly where you are.
Which brings us to the connection between this art and an individual's deep honesty. The concept of the honest self, which I found to be just a staggering way to frame this whole conversation.
It's brilliant.
The author writes, "We don't find ourselves in sad songs because we are sad. We find ourselves there because those songs refuse to lie."
That is a masterclass in reframing the listener's relationship to the music.
Hmm.
Music isn't merely a reflection of a temporary mood. It is a reflection of fundamental authenticity.
Yes. And the author paints this picture of the dim room. Let's go back to that scene we said at the very beginning of the deep dive.
The overcast evening.
Right. You sitting alone in a dim room, the amber light coming through the window, listening to a devastating piece of music.
Mm.
Society, the self-help industry, the corporate world, the relentless optimists often tells us that the person sitting alone in that dim room is our worst self.
That it's our weak self.
Our defeated self. The self that needs to snap out of it, get off the couch, and get back to the brightly lit party of productive society. We are taught to be ashamed of the dim room. But the author argues the exact opposite.
The author suggests that the version of you in that dim room is, in fact, your most honest self. Think about what is happening in that room.
What's happening?
It is the version of you that has finally stripped away the necessary heavy armor of daily life. During the day, you have to smile at your boss, you have to be polite to strangers, you have to project competence and stability.
Right.
But in that dim room, alone with the music, you openly acknowledge everything that is terrifying but true.
You acknowledge the things we spend all day trying not to think about. That loss is an absolute guarantee that every relationship you have will eventually end in separation or death.
Yes.
That beauty is painfully temporary, that the people you love are fragile.
And yet, and this is the crucial redeeming part of the honest self in that dim room, acknowledging all of that inevitable heartbreak, you still decide that engaging with life and love is somehow entirely worth the cost. You sit with the tragedy of it all, and you don't turn off the music. You let it play.
It is the self that is brave enough to look at the whole picture without flinching, that connects sad art to honesty so perfectly. And I want to pause here and just let that sink in for you listening. If you have ever felt ashamed for needing to retreat into a dark room and listen to a sad song, if you've ever felt like you were failing at being happy because you were drawn to melancholic art, this essay is giving you a profound, scientifically and culturally backed permission slip.
Yes.
You are not failing. You are not broken. You are accessing a deep, honest dimension of your humanity.
Which brings us beautifully to the practical application of this philosophy. Because understanding the aesthetics of melancholy, tracing it back to the Greeks and the Japanese, is intellectually satisfying.
Right. It's great theory.
But how do we take this grand, centuries-old philosophy and actually apply it to our everyday lives, especially when we are feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of our emotions?
Yes, exactly. I want to give some really practical advice for understanding emotions in daily life. How do we use this on a random Tuesday afternoon when we just feel incredibly heavy?
The essay doesn't just leave us in the theoretical realm of literary analysis, thankfully.
No, it gives us a few incredibly actionable, practical takeaways for managing and understanding our daily emotions. The first practical piece of advice is wonderfully straightforward, but probably the hardest to execute. Stop apologizing for your melancholic tastes.
It sounds simple, but it's deeply transformative because it requires rewiring how you judge yourself. The text explicitly says the next time you reach for that song, the one that opens something in your chest, don't apologize for it.
Right. If you are curating a playlist for a road trip and you want to include 5 heartbreaking ballads in a row, do it.
Do not hide it. Do not qualify it by saying, oh, sorry, I'm just in a weird mood today.
Yeah, we do that so often.
We do. Recognize that this desire is not a weakness. As we've discussed for the past hour, it is a sophisticated, hardwired psychological mechanism for seeking comfort, achieving felt tenderness, and finding profound emotional relief. You need to trust that your internal compass knows what it needs to process the day.
So no more calling them guilty pleasures when it comes to sad art. There should be no guilt in seeking comfort. They're just pleasures. Or, I guess, profound recognitions.
Absolutely.
The second practical takeaway for understanding emotions in daily life is a bit more of a daily mindset shift. The author tells us to treat melancholy not as a wound that needs a bandage, but as a kind of attention. What does that mean practically? How do I pay attention melancholically?
This is where we can practically apply the Japanese concept of mono to our daily routines. Usually when we encounter an ending, our instinct is to rush past it. We want to avoid the discomfort of the transition. But treating melancholy as a kind of attention means deliberately slowing down during those moments. When a really good conversation with a friend is winding down over coffee, when a season is visibly changing from summer to autumn, When you read the last page of a great book, allow yourself to actually feel the gentle, undeniable sadness of that conclusion.
Don't just immediately pick up your phone and start scrolling to numb the transition.
Exactly. Do not numb it or rush to the next distraction. Use melancholy as a lens. Use it to deliberately notice the impossibility of holding on to things.
That's beautiful.
By paying this specific kind of attention, you actually heighten your appreciation for the present moment. You realize how precious the coffee with a friend was precisely because you were acknowledging that it is over. The melancholy isn't ruining the moment. It is sealing it into your memory with reverence.
It's like turning up the contrast on a photograph. The dark edges make the bright colors in the center pop even more intensely.
That's a great visual.
If you allow yourself to feel the melancholy of a Sunday evening as the weekend ends, the classic Sunday scaries, instead of fighting it with anxiety about Monday, if you just sit with the sadness that the weekend is over, you are actually honoring how good the rest was.
That is a perfect practical application.
Yeah.
And to offer a bit more expert input on the physiology of this, always remember what the text says about the visceral bodily reaction we have to this art.
The felt tenderness.
Yes. When a song or a scene in a movie physically opens something in your chest, when you feel that catch in your throat, it is a physiological signal. It is happening because a part of you, a deeply buried, vulnerable part of you, is desperately trying to be seen.
Wow.
Even if you are completely alone, even if you are just being seen by yourself in the dark on an ordinary evening, you owe it to yourself to allow that part of your psyche the space to be witnessed without judgment. The art is simply the facilitator of that vital self-witnessing.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and synthesize everything we've talked about today, the biological paradox of seeking pain to find prolactin-induced comfort, the survival maps embedded in broken stories that allow us to process our own gaps, the cultural wisdom of Japan and Portugal that elevate impermanence and absence to high art, and the deep, radical honesty of sitting alone in the dim room, we arrive at the final, incredibly powerful quote from our source text.
It really sums it all up.
The author concludes the essay by saying, "To feel deeply is not a weakness. It is the whole point."
It is the whole point. We are not here on this earth just to skim the pleasant, frictionless surface of experience. We are here to feel the entire, terrifying, beautiful spectrum.
Man, what a journey this has been today. Let's do a quick recap to tie all these threads together for you before we go.
Sure.
We started by exploring the sad music paradox, discovering that the vast majority of us seek out sad music not to wallow in despair, but because it provides tangible psychological relief through felt tenderness. It gives our chaotic, unframed, real-world emotions a safe, manageable aesthetic frame.
We then looked at how long-form broken stories, tracing all the way back to Greek tragedies and up through sweeping modern novels, act as survival maps.
Right.
They give us the narrative distance we need to bypass our own ego defenses and process our own overwhelming, blinding grief by crying for fictional characters.
We also expanded our cultural horizons beyond Western psychology, comparing the beautiful Japanese concept of mono-wear, finding deep aesthetic beauty in the fleeting, impermanent nature of the present, with the Portuguese concept of saudade.
Finding a profound, lingering majesty in the enduring absence of what we have loved and lost in the past. Both concepts teach us that embracing loss, rather than fighting it, is the ultimate sign of emotional intelligence.
And finally, we realize that leaning into dark art isn't about being consumed by despair. It is a deliberate aesthetic choice for depth. It connects deeply with our personal honesty. The sad songs don't make us sad. They just refuse to lie to us about how hard, how fragile, and how incredibly beautiful it all is.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought to consider long after this audio stops playing.
Yes, let's leave them with something to think about.
We have established, based on the text and the psychology we've explored today, that our most honest selves might just be the ones sitting alone in those dim rooms. It is the self that is privately embracing the fragility of love and the absolute reality of loss through the art we consume.
Right, the mask finally comes off in the dark. We stop pretending.
Exactly. But this raises a fascinating and perhaps slightly uncomfortable question for you to mull over. What does that say about the relentlessly cheerful masks we feel forced to wear in public every single day?
Oof.
If our truest, most tender, and most empathetic selves are hidden away in our private melancholy, perhaps we are collectively hiding the absolute best parts of our humanity from each other. If we brought just a fraction of that private melancholy, that honest acknowledgement of our shared fragility into our public interactions, would we all feel a lot less lonely in the bright light of day?
Wow. That really hits home. If we just admitted we were all a little broken, the brokenness wouldn't be so isolating. We would just be humans together. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you take these ideas, this research, and these beautiful cultural concepts with you into your week. And honestly, tonight, when the sun goes down and that amber light hits the window, we highly encourage you to go press play on your favorite sad song with a brand new perspective.
Don't apologize for it. Let it hold you.
We will catch you on the next deep dive.